Welcome back to Cheap Pop again. Did you miss us? Probably not, because we're actually not showing this live, but we're recording these back to back. So if you were watching us live, it would be like, and the show's over, and the show's beginning. Here we are again. So we got episodes 5 and 6 to talk about here for Neon Genesis Evangelion. And we're going to finally get a perspective, a little bit of insight into Rei and even Shinji's father, Gendo Ikari. Matt, what were your immediate takeaways with this episode? A little bit better, a little bit more energy, perhaps?
Definitely loving the energy. Feel like we're getting a lot further. The slowness has sped up, so I'm definitely enjoying this one more. A lot more like insight into the characters that we were kind of questioning. We get to see like a little bit more of like school time banter between the kids, which had some pretty hilarious lines in it as we were discussing in the off session. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I liked it.
Now, what's interesting with this episode here, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, this episode opens up with them basically at the site of the last angel battle, right? Like they're looking over the core of the angel, and they're trying to like analyze it and everything. And we get an interesting line there. It's something that can be easily kind of glossed over. In a conversation between Misato and Ritsuko, they're talking about how the angels, even though like the computer they're trying to use to like analyze the material of the angels doesn't recognize all of the elements, it still makes the claim that, or Ritsuko rather makes this claim that the angels, from what they understand of them, are 99.8% the same as humans, as like human DNA essentially. It's either 99.8 or 98.9. I forget which of those it is.
It's high, that's for sure.
Very, very high. And that's a fascinating sort of question too, because like you look at those, and you're like, eh.
Yeah, that doesn't look like what we got going on
here. No. So an interesting sort of thing there. But while all of this conversation is going on, Misato recognizes that Shinji is kind of like snooping around, peeking around the corner, and he sees burns on his father's hands, and he's very interested, I guess, in that. Like, I don't know if concerned is the right word, because they're not even like fresh burns, like they're scars at this point. And so when he kind of says, like, when he's called out on it, essentially, I think Misato is initially kind of like, oh, it's cute, you're fibbing about what you're doing. Like, it's just another one of those things that kind of makes him feel awkward, like he's being talked to as a child. And then he's like, well, no, it's just I noticed father's hands are burned, and I was wondering what happened. And Ritsuko gives a little bit of that insight that during because these episodes, Rei Part 1 and Part 2, delve into, as I said, Gendo and Rei's characters individually a little bit, and sort of the dynamic between them. And Rei, when testing Unit 0, which is the prototype Eva, rampaged. Like, they had it basically almost fully synced when it was down to the wire of like passing the threshold, at which point I think it's like, okay, we have a firm connection now. Like, we control basically if this breaks down or not, like if we release this connection. Her Eva went berserk, started smashing through the glass. Gendo standing like a stone-faced SOB. The thing's like trying to punch through the wall and glass to get at him, and he's just not even blinking. He's just like, glass is like fracturing and like raining into the room all around him, and he's just like not budging at all. And they cut the power, so basically that's where we got the 1 minute thing. By the way, the prototype had a 1 minute auxiliary power on it, and so they were having to wait for Rei's to power down because it's going berserk. And in the midst of all this, they finally got the command through to force the pilot ejection, the plug injection basically. And so it like rockets out of the room and falls to the ground. This thing's still rampaging by itself, and the pilot is trapped in this tube, basically laying in the corner of the room. Like, oh, this thing could easily like pick it up, crush it, step on it, whatever, like this is like a very dire situation.
Yeah, how is the ejection like the smart plan at this point?
I think they were, I don't know if they assumed that by removing the plug that it would essentially immediately deactivate.
Oh yeah, because because we get the liquid that's draining, so we're thinking that that's gonna power it off a little sooner. But yeah, it's like a kid throwing a tantrum. And you want to talk about scale? That is the first time I was like, oh wow, that is a great indication of scale. Is there's like a little pill, a very long pill that comes out of their chest, and the pilot is just a little tiny piece of that pill. So you really get to see like, oh wow, that's a lot bigger than even I was thinking it was to this point, seeing what I've seen in the past episodes.
Yeah. So they end up shooting in this like red foam gel, whatever, and it basically like hardens like a concrete and immobilizes the thing, and then it powers down. Gendo runs into the room. Rei's tube is essentially it's scalding for some reason, like it's burning hot. I don't know if that was just like how hot those things run when they're like inside. Obviously the pilots aren't roasting, so there's got to be something in there doing it.
Well, it's got rockets or something attached to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, because it propelled itself out, so maybe the fire or the heat from the propulsion thing shooting it out of the thing's back, trying to get to a safe distance. But again, there's a ceiling there, so it just scrapes along the ceiling and then drops 100, 200 feet, whatever, and hits the ground. So maybe that's what it is the metal was heated by the propulsion. But Gendo just bare hand like opens the latch. He's getting burned the whole time and goes to check on Rei. She's barely conscious. It's a little confusing to me because how we see her introduced in episode 1, and this is implied to be the accident, right? But we saw her in episode 1 in the state she's in, and yet you see like when she's in this tube, like that doesn't look like she's near as bad as what we saw in episode 1.
Yeah.
And they talk about it as if that fairly recently happened. So I don't know, because maybe that's not the moment, because I do think they make a reference to her doing test runs trying to do something with Unit 1 and it not really synchronizing at the level. And so they just kept trying to tweak things and come back and try it again. So they probably tried with the prototype with Unit 0, and now they've been trying to figure that out for a long time. Thought they would make her then the pilot of Unit 1, and then Shinji came into the picture, and so like, oh, well, his synchronization rate is off the charts, so we'll just plug him in, and I guess now we'll try and fix Unit 0 and get her in that, so we at least have 2 of these now. Maybe that's the indication, because nothing in her fall matches with what we saw her in the first episode, where she's got cast and her eye covered and she's bleeding. None of that.
I got the same indication. I was like, this feels like this was supposed to be the inciting incident that caused all of her, like, eye patch and all how damaged she's looking in our first episode. But yeah, you do not get that impression unless he literally saves her from the capsule and then just starts beating the crap out of her.
Right. And think about it in this way too. His hands are already scarred over. So like if those burns happened within the last week, they would probably still be like pus, blister, scab, like it would still be very gnarly, not like an old wound like it kind of looks like. So I think that's the indication, is that that's not the inciting incident, even though I was speculating that earlier. Now that I think about it, I don't think that holds up. So I don't know that we ever actually see what caused those injuries, and I don't know that they'd necessarily matter, but we do know that they were trying to use her for Unit 1, whether that was because they determined Unit 0 a failure, or they simply thought that, well, Unit 0 went berserk, we don't know why, but here's Unit 1, we have this, so let's see if she can work with this. And then Shinji fell into their lap, or rather they brought him in, and they didn't have to worry about it. And like, okay, I guess we'll go back to the plan of her piloting Unit 0, which will come into play later on. But so Shinji gets this kind of explained to him, and we know that Rei, she's no one really knows her past. Her entire history is scrubbed. She's very robotic and flat, and it's kind of like her value and sense of importance doesn't matter. She will do things if she's ordered to do them. And there's like a type of detachment there, essentially. But Shinji's also interested in this. Like, he's perplexed. And I think part of that's just, yeah, she's the other Eva pilot, so of course I should like want to get to know her, to be friends with her at least. And so like when they're at school, and again, the weirdness of it, it's literally like gym, and they're like doing swimming lessons or something, and you're just like, the things that matter in this world, like, I don't know. It's weird that Shinji like well, after school today, I got to fight an angel to the death, but let me work on my breaststroke. So they're at gym class. His friends are drooling over all the girls, of course, and they notice Shinji's checking out Rei. Then they're like, "Oh, what are we checking out her boobs, her butt?" Like, "Oh,
Said, are you looking at her bazungas? And I was
bazungas,
like,
yeah."
bazungas? That's not a thing. Like bazongas, I've heard, never bazungas.
Who knows, man? But yeah, they're thinking Shinji's just silently perving out as well. And then he's like, "Oh no, actually, I was just thinking about like, I wonder why she's always alone." And they're like, "Huh? Oh yeah, I mean, she transferred here last year. Come to think of it, I don't think she's ever even talked to anybody, like had a friend. Like, that's weird. You seem like you would if you saw the way they kind of badgered Shinji even before he admitted to being the new pilot. So it's weird then that they would, I guess maybe with Rei, they just immediately realized like, this is kind of a dead end. She doesn't really say anything, and they just dropped it. But yeah, the moment they thought they were bonding with Shinji a little bit and checking out the girls, and it turns out, nope, he's just in his head, like wondering why this person's lonely. Like,
It's like, no, I'm just wondering what they're thinking about right now. They're like, we were just thinking about those sweet, sweet cans.
yeah, ridiculous. But because Gendo, Shinji's father, saved Rei, she has this great respect and admiration for him. And so, like, Shinji watching them from afar, like he's in Unit 1 at one point, and you can see them on this platform across the way. They're talking with each other, and they're both smiling. Like, Rei is actually, like, lit up, like, looks like a real person instead of just a flat, borderline cyborg, animatronic, whatever. And Gendo is smiling, and Shinji's just like, what the hell is this? He doesn't even like me. Why does he like her so much?
I'm getting some major creep vibe too.
Yeah. And she has kept as a souvenir, I guess you would say, his glasses from that day because they fell off his face and broke, which, if nothing else, shows the physical resemblance as well to Shinji. Like, you look at Gendo and you're like, I could see that being Shinji one day. Like, give him like the trashy, what is it, the thin chin strap beard and everything, and you basically got Shinji at that point. But when they're reporting for duty, well, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. There's an interesting scene at Misato's where Ritsuko comes over for dinner, and it's like, okay,
Yes.
they're talking a little bit, and they're like, okay, by the way, Shinji, I need you to give the security key to Rei. I totally forgot to do it today, which is already kind of a weird thing. But in the midst of this conversation and everything, you're finding out like, oh, once again, Misato's already like several beers in. She's talking about like the dinner and everything. Like, oh, thanks for inviting me over and everything. They take a bite and they're like, oh, like it's horrible. And they're like, how do you screw up boil? Like,
How can someone ruin boil in a bag food?
yeah.
And she says it in just the best way with the absolute perfect comedic delivery. I was dying watching that scene.
And I like they give it to the penguin too, and like the penguin like takes a small nibble and basically like falls over nearly dead.
Yep. That was the really like very good comedic scene right there.
Yeah, and I liked it as well. Her ad of that of like, Shinji, I would prefer if the next time I was invited over for dinner, you cook the meal.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
What was the way that Misato like asked for her request of the food was like weird. When she asked for more, she was like, just pour it right in, like to her already open container, and she's like, I find the food's better if you don't actually fill in as much hot water as they say.
Yes.
So it's like,
and everyone else is just like, no.
Yeah. Just a ridiculous little scene that gives again more insight into their characters. I like little character moments like that. The series does a pretty good job with those here and there. But the takeaway from this whole scene is just, okay, there's new security cards because Ritsuko was coming over to their house that night anyway. She was able to give Shinji's his there, but she didn't give Rei hers. So now Shinji, before he reports to Nerve in the morning, has to go to her apartment. Okay. Well, he goes in, apparently door is just unlocked or whatever. So he just like walks in and like an awkward 14-year-old creep basically is like, oh, I'm just gonna look around. Oh. Now, to be fair, it does look like a horror show in there. It's like nothing's in there, but there's bloody bandages. There's, like food trays as if it was like a hospital room or something. Like, it just does not look like a person living there, let alone a 14-year-old girl. And
very dark too.
yeah, and he opens one of the drawers and he sees the glasses, and he's like, "Oh, are these father's glasses? They kind of look like them." He puts them on and turns around. She's just gotten out of the shower and sees him wearing the glasses.
He's just like staring at her like an absolute creep too.
Yeah, and he's dumbstruck. He's like, "Oh, naked, naked." Like, he just can't do anything. Meanwhile, she's pissed that he's wearing the glasses because that is like a
slaps the shit out of him.
Well, that's later. The slap happens. She comes up and
I thought she slapped the glasses off of his face.
She grabs them first. She grabs the glasses and goes to pull them away, and the bag on his shoulder gets stuck on like the drawer. He trips and falls on her. They have then that awkward like, oh, I'm like
on you naked, and then there's just underwear.
Underwear rains down because the drawer pulled out and it was like her bras and panties. And
my next step was, well, I guess we're not horny for Masato anymore. It's transferred to this 14-year-old child.
Yeah, it's Rei at that point that he's literally groping and doesn't even realize he's groping, and she's like, "Can you get off?" It's one of the few times you hear like some emotion to her voice, and he's like, "What?" He like looks down, he's like full cup in her boob, like, "Oh,
it's like, sorry." I felt like that.
Yeah,
it's like I couldn't. I don't know, but yeah, this was another one where it's like you get that long awkward pause, but it's better here because it's kind of building to the comedic tension of her being like, "All right, well, if you could not be here, that'd be great."
And it's interesting too because he doesn't even end up giving her the key there. Like, he says why he came, but then like the next morning when maybe she just wasn't listening, because the next morning they both get to the headquarters at the same time, and she's trying to use the old key card.
Yeah,
it's not working.
It to her right then. I was confused as well. I was like, did you go over for that very thing? There was like the scene transition between the two. I couldn't really figure out what happened in between there, I guess.
Yeah. Maybe it was that even though he explained why he was there, it was going so poorly, he just like still spaced actually giving it to her, like, yeah, sorry, see you later, and like never actually gave it to her. And so maybe she didn't even know it. Maybe that's why she was trying the fake card. She just thought he came up with a bullshit lie to like come creep on her or something. And so she's trying the old card, it's not working. He's like, well, yeah, see, here's the card. This is why I was here. She runs it once, it opens up, and they go down the elevator, or escalator rather. And this is an interesting scene too. Shinji's trying to find out why she pilots her Eva. And in the conversation, he's like, well, aren't you scared? And she's like, no, not at all. Don't you believe in your father's work? And some of Shinji's abandonment and daddy issues come out here. He's like, of course not from a father like him. And that's when she turns and just slaps the shit out of his face.
I think that was the second slap, I believe. Now, I will go back and double check, but I think she slaps him originally after getting the glasses off. But yeah, she smacks him again right here. And she's pissed that he has insulted this. And this is where I'm really like, okay, something weird is happening between them. Like, she's keeping his glasses as a keepsake. She's like opening up and being like very, I don't know, maybe flirtatious. We don't really know the context of the conversation. But also when he opens the hatch, which I believe happened earlier in the episode.
Yeah,
right?
Earlier.
He is like genuinely.
Oh, he's freaked out for her.
Oh, he's which is why he burned his own hands, which I'm getting like a very like lovey vibe here. I don't know what the situation is, but this also goes back to like kind of my theories on like who are the kids, why are we here, which I'm like, okay, I think Shinji is maybe a clone, and maybe I'm like trying to figure out where Rei comes into play. I'm like, is she like part of his DNA? Is she? And then I'm like trying to think of other options. Like maybe he created this program with like his wife, and that's her clone, and she is like you know, attached to him in a way that like he still has like lingering feelings from his past wife, or maybe they've like even traded her consciousness into this child. I'm going like really outlandish.
You're out there, but
Yeah.
I'm
Hey,
interested.
you told me to beware that this thing can throw me for a loop. So I'm thinking like, what's the most outlandish thing? So at this point, I'm thinking maybe there was a wife, maybe we have transferred her consciousness into this child, and that's why she's not into Shinji right now, because he's just a clone, he's not the person. And maybe that even sets up Shinji for eventually like being taken over. Like maybe, you know, he's susceptible, which in addition to him being like a direct clone of this person, maybe they can like transfer consciousness at some point. And now I'm just like, maybe I've gone totally off the rails, but
it's an interesting ride. Like I'm following along with this. I'm like, okay, all right, yeah, that doesn't feel out there, like based on what I know of the world of Eva. So I'm like, if you told me that was a plot point, I'd be like, yeah, I could believe that with Ava. Yeah. Yeah, so as they're reporting to Nerve that morning, it's for Rei's resynchronization test with Unit 0. So we saw the hand burning incident where she nearly died. In the previous test, her connection with Gendo started really there. I think at that point, that was when she developed the sort of, I don't know if infatuation is the right word, but at the very least, like, like real admiration, respect, whatever for him. Like, she is actually a person interacting with him, whereas everyone else, she is very monotone and flat and just kind of like, what am I being told to do? What am I instructed to do? And this is the first time they're going to try and reactivate Unit 0. And so this is a huge deal because they're like, okay, yeah, that's why Shinji's asking her at the beginning, like, are you scared? Because it's like, this went really badly for you last time and you nearly died. And she's just like, no, because she basically is saying, like, no, because don't you believe in your father's work? Because she's basically saying, like, I give him my full trust and confidence that this is going to work this time because he's had time to try and figure this out. So he wouldn't be putting me back in this case if he wasn't convinced it was going to work, which, again, is showing just her level of trust and belief in him. And that's why she's so offended that even his own son, Shinji, whom maybe if you want to dig into her a little bit more, her character, maybe an unspoken thing of Rei would even be that she would somewhat resent the fact that Unit 1, which is supposed to be the best Eva, you know, like their ultimate thing, is given to him, Shinji, who wasn't trained, unlike her, who doesn't even believe in the father's work and what he's doing. It has no confidence in him, whereas she has been training in this for at least a year and has done all of this stuff, has been loyal, has done everything asked of her, and does believe in Gendo. So maybe there is a little bit of underlying thing there where you could almost say, like, I almost wish there was a scene then where you had one more interaction between Rei and Gendo where you could pick up on this sort of irritation from Rei. Like, really, him? Like, you're putting your trust in him. Like, what have I not done for that? Because this is like, this underlying thing is like a big thing in Ava as we delve into the characters and kind of what really spurs, like what motivates them, what makes them act the way they do, speak the way they do at times to certain people. There's always stuff beneath the surface, and it's an interesting thing. So I think that would have been cool to see, because that's something that even just as I was starting to say that out loud, I was like following the bouncing ball in my own head, like, yes, I could see that. Yes.
It also makes me wonder, you know, I keep thinking that there's some sort of genetic engineering going on with the children, like regardless of the other things that I mentioned. But, you know, maybe he's testing different things as far as like a connection level. So, you know, maybe she was genetically engineered to like be very like obedient to his command, which is why there's that like kind of like borderline like obsession level looking thing. And maybe that's why he like has so much care for her, because he like built in this like essentially love almost, and then decided, okay, I'm gonna train her, she's gonna be like, you know, really like listens to whatever I say. And then on this other hand, Shinji,
Gendo, the New York mobster. She's gonna do whatever I says.
So Shinji, on the other hand, is like, we're not going to give him any training. We're not going
Yeah,
to give him any love, any attention, anything.
it almost
And we're
sounds like
going
a
to,
science experiment.
yeah, exactly. That he's like one of multiple tests in this hypothesis that they're, how could this possibly affect our experiment? How is it going to affect the connection with the Evas? And I think that's what it's down to, is like why that Eva is his, is because I don't know if there's, I mean, I guess there is definitely a difference in how good one is versus the other, but she is also the more experienced pilot, which would mean you would get the one that's a little bit shadier because you could handle it. Whereas he is already, I don't know, he's already in a bad starting spot.
Yeah, true. But even as we say, she's the more experienced pilot. Her one attempt at synchronization was with Unit Zero, and it failed to sync completely. She was basically rejected. And so, like, all of her training thus far has been like the theoretical, right? It's not the applied thing. So it's like, it's tough to say. Like, yes, Unit Zero as the prototype is not as advanced as Unit One. But even still, like, it is an interesting sort of thing, even though she doesn't have the in the field experience. Not like she piloted Unit Zero in battle or anything like that, or even test simulations previously. She still would at least have the background and have read up on it and understood, been taught how this stuff works, maybe done some degree of at least the educational process.
Well, and I think we're realizing with what we've seen so far that these I'm going to say machines, are more stupid cowboy than really like knowing how to use it, because the best it ever gets is kind of when people are just off the rails. Like the first battle, when he really just like kind of blacks out rage situation, that's when he kills the angels. Second situation, same thing. It's really like, it was not focus, it was not training, it was like letting your body take
Very
over
primal instinct sort of thing. Yeah.
Fully integrate with this thing.
Yeah. So in Rei's test, the resynchronization test, it does succeed this time. It does pass the threshold where they can maintain the connection at that point. However, before they're able to advance in the test, they get warning that there is another angel attack coming. And this is a very weird looking angel. It's like a 3D pyramid thing with like a giant eye. And Unit Zero still is not, it doesn't have any of its like battle armor or weaponry or anything, especially because of how the last test went. They're like, we're going to keep this thing as bare bones, just see if the base thing will sink. And it does, but they can't send Unit Zero up into battle, but Shinji can be sent up into battle. And this is kind of what I love about this too, is like, just like we see Nerve and its various moving parts like strategize and adjust battle to battle, encounter to encounter, the angels are doing the same thing, even though this is the third angel that we've seen. I forget what number of angel they say it is overall, because when they're referencing it, they might say like, this is the fifth angel. They're referencing previous events, the second impact or another impact. Like, they're referencing ever angels that have been encountered, I guess, by humanity. And so Shinji is sent up, and before he even comes up from the elevator, this thing is already charging its like strongest attack for him, so that like the elevator comes up and he's immediately getting like, what is this, like a plasma cannon or something like to the chest. I think I had the note of it.
Yeah, we have gone to the point where we are Call of Duty. Somebody's got a sniper rifle on the spawn point, and they're just waiting to pull the trigger.
Yeah, camping for sure. It's an accelerated particle cannon. So the second Unit 1 breaks through the surface, and it's like hydraulic elevator thing, which shoots it up like a rocket. It's not like it's a slow rising thing. The thing is blasting him straight in the chest, which again, if you were to say like, thinking in terms of angels and where their cores are, it's blasting him where our core would be. And you could essentially say that the humans, the pilots, are like the cores within the Evas, essentially, because where it interjects in the base of the spinal cord probably would sit about more center of the sternum, but close by where the heart would be for like a person, anatomy. And Shinji's getting effed up by this thing. It is immediately melting through all the layers of his armor, and they have to like immediately basically like pull the hydraulic lift back down. And I think they say it melted through like 9 of the 13 layers within like 3 seconds of the blast or something like that.
And it hits pretty close to where like we've seen that pod come out too.
Yep.
You're like, oh, this is danger zone right here.
Yep. And so Shinji is already in critical condition. Just like that, Shinji is like out of action. Unit 1 is out of action. You're like, okay. Rei is not battle ready as far as her Eva. Shinji and Unit 1 are effed up, and he's going to obviously survive, but they got to rush him into like this almost like a medically induced coma, essentially, and treat his wounds. They're not believed to be like, he's in critical condition, but he is expected to pull through. And now they've got a ticking clock because this angel is basically drilling down into the geofront, into Nerve HQ. And they're like, okay, we've got 12 hours, and now we have a ticking clock where we got to get Shinji out of his coma. We have to get Unit 1 repaired and combat ready, and we have to come up with a plan to engage this thing again. So we also have to get Unit 0 ready as well to come up with this plan. I actually really like these 2 episodes side by side, not just the amount of character work you get, but I like the problem solving of it. So that's where episode 5 wraps up, and we roll right into episode 6, which is Rei Part 2. The episode basically begins, you have they set up decoys to see how the angel is going to react. They're basically trying to figure out how close can you get to this thing before it attacks a target. So they're putting up like fake Eva Unit 1s.
Yeah, like a big balloon.
Yeah, so that it'll shoot at it, and they're like, okay, here's what its range is. So we have to be just outside this to shoot it from. And they're like, all right, great. Do we have artillery that can actually shoot that far, let alone with the kind of impact we need? Because it does have an AT field. If you shoot at it with just the rifles or whatever, it's going to bounce right off it. It's going to deflect from it. So they have to figure out a solution. And effectively what they do is this is the 99.89 was that DNA level. For some reason, I had the note in this episode notes instead of the last one. So there is some kind of scientific organization that does have an accelerated particle cannon, which, yeah, convenience there. But they're like, all right, well, we're going to commandeer this. And to power it, they're like, all right, we're going to basically black out the city of, like, all of Japan. Not even just Tokyo 3, like all of Japan, rolling blackouts. And we're going to it's not that they have one shot. It's that realistically they have one shot, because once the element of surprise is gone, they're screwed, because the thing has like a 20-second cooldown, 30-second cooldown before it can even fire again.
Yeah, and you've got to replace the fuse. It's a process. It's not just a reload.
Yeah, so this is going to be a whole thing for them. Again, the ticking clock as this thing is drilling down, trying to get into Nerve HQ. And if it gets into Nerve HQ, like through the geofront, and then fires that laser at it, it's like game over for everything. So what I like is when Shinji wakes up from his coma, Rei comes and tells him the plan. And, he, just like before, admits he's scared, never wants to pilot an Eva again. And, she's like, all right, fine. You don't have to. I'll pilot Unit 1. And it's like, but you just told him the plan that requires 2 Evas. What are you talking about? You can't do both. And, they even have a note that, like, his sync rate is better than hers. That's why he's piloting Unit 1. Even though she can now successfully sync with Unit 0, she's never synced with Unit 1. So, like, that's a thing, too. But because Shinji had the better sync rate, the plan is basically Shinji is going to be the one firing this gun, and Rei's only job is to protect him. So they have a shield that they're like, this will buy you about 17 seconds against that laser. And that's all you're going to get. So Shinji, if you fuck up, she's probably dead, because the thing is going to counterfire, and then before you really have the next shot ready, it's probably already going to be through her shield, and she'll be just hit directly like you were earlier.
Yeah, this first question is...
what happens if he misses? Major valid question there. I do like, though, even before the mission, right before they depart, there's another good little character scene with them where Shinji again asks Rei why she pilots the Eva. He always wants to understand people's motivations for this because it's like he's so scared of the idea. He's like, why do you do it? How do you do it? Like he's just trying to understand. And this is the best insight we get into Rei thus far. She basically says it's because she has nothing else. It is her link to everyone. Otherwise, she does not matter. Her life does not matter. They've erased her existence. If she's not an Eva pilot doing what she's doing, she doesn't have anyone around her to care for her, anything. Like, that's why she just does what's asked of her. It's kind of like the mode Shinji was almost stepping into a last episode, you know? It's just that like she is like fully immersed in that. Like she has completely gone into that mode where like that is now what she does. And Shinji is still kind of waffling a little bit. Like he hasn't really settled on that being his coping mechanism or whatever.
Yeah, her wording was so weird too, because I think she just says, it's my link. And you're like, what do you mean your link? She's like, it's my link, you know, your link. It's like, oh, okay. Don't know what that
means. And then she tells him, you know, he shouldn't be afraid anyway, because he's not going to die. She'll protect him. And then she says farewell, and then basically just pieces out and goes into her Eva to go report for the attack. And once the actual encounter happens with the Angel, it basically still senses. I think that Angel actually can sense the charging power of his thing, even though he's outside the perimeter, because he's so far away that like these measurements have to be absolutely precise. Now the Eva will line it up for him, but when he fires his laser, the Angel, like right as he's about to pull the trigger, basically fires one back, and the two beams, like their gravity off of each other, makes them both miss. But the whole point is the Angel can charge its shit way faster. And so Shinji is like, oh crap. And so he has to quickly try and change the fuse and try and power it back up. Meanwhile, the Angel, within 10 seconds, is already firing again. And Rei has to jump in front with the shield, take the full brunt of it. I don't know how long it is. They told us she had about 17 seconds of cover. She probably used at least 14 of the seconds. But Shinji does change the fuse, fire through, and it shoots directly through the weak spot of the Angel. The power of the particle cannon is enough to break through its AT field, and right through the core, basically just destroys it on the spot. But as that's happening, the drill is piercing down through the geofront. So you see it coming down like into the actual like underground city sort of, which is pretty interesting. But same sort of thing. Rei's Eva is just completely trashed.
Oh, the shield melting and like the suits melting.
Curled into a ball like over it. It's like now part of the Eva almost. And Shinji has to like rip off the back panel and pull out which talk about a delicate procedure that he just does unabashedly. I'd be like, oh, dude, this feels like this should be like surgical care. But rips out the tube, sets it on the ground, and then mirroring Gendo from episode 5, that flashback, Shinji runs over, pries it open despite the burning thing with his bare hands, and opens the panel. And when he sees she's okay, he starts crying. That weirds her out. She's like, I don't know how to react in these situations. And he basically is just like, don't ever do that again. Like, don't ever say something sad like farewell and then just leave. Like, basically, you do have something to live for. I'm here. I'm your friend. You do have something. Like, basically trying to like assure her like you have unconditional love if that's what you feel like you don't have. If you feel like that's the reason you have to do this so that someone will actually care. I'm telling you I care, essentially, is what he's saying.
And that's another one of the scenes that like gave me this weird theory too, is I'm like, it seemed so close to what the dad scene was. And it's like, you know, maybe this was his past. And like, that's the first moment that he like really felt feelings for this girl or whatever the case may be, which, you know, ends up him being in the future. But yeah, it's like there was such an interesting parallel between like his father and him. And this, you know, this affection for her really comes out of like basically nowhere. They really haven't had that much time to interact. They've had their like little awkward run-in, but He definitely just, I don't know, like the thought of her like dying for him really like seemed to trigger something in him.
Yeah, I think part of it could be just he's 14 and stuff is a little more impulsive. And when you think about like you
Oh
could
yeah.
die any moment, there's going to be a little bit more impulsivity in that at two, I think. Um, and then we're talking about like kind of the parallel we see. I'm sure on some level Shinji might be aware of the parallel of the pod situation, but I was talking about earlier, sort of like why she pilots an Eva. That's basically why he's admitted as well to others why he's doing it. And so it's kind of like I think he sees and understands like we're very much alike like this, and we're like the only two people who know this experience. And so I think
Yeah.
he feels sort of a kinship with her. There is an interesting moment too, where when he's asking her, she's like, "Oh, I don't know how to react in a situation like this." He's just like, "Oh, just try smiling." And like she literally visualizes like Gendo's face over him, essentially, like the ghostly visage or whatever of Gendo over Shinji's face, and then she smiles, and it's a weird smile too. So I was just like, uh, can you like? I'm cool with you guys having like a bond or whatever now, like her and Shinji now after this experience, but it's like, can you not give the angle of Gendo and make it kind of weird? But it's the same sort of thing. I think it's just kind of like she understands like, okay, Shinji might be a little bit of a black sheep as far as like not being like Gendo, but there is still Gendo in him. And so I think for
Yeah.
that alone, she is like, okay, I can trust him. I can rely on him because at least to some level, to some measure, I know I can rely on Gendo. And so to some measure or whatever, I can rely on Shinji as well. So it's a very good episode. It's probably the best 1-2 episode punch for really understanding not Rei in terms of her backstory, but just her in the moment as a character, like what motivates her, what drives her. When we get into all the batshit crazy stuff later, your brain will break. But for now, it's a really good character moment, and I love this 2-part episode here. I think it's fantastic. And like I said, the element of the blackouts in Japan, you see like them even doing that, like shutting down all the power to Japan just to charge this thing up for a single shot, and he fucking misses. It's just like, oh, it's just
They're like, whoops. Yeah, and it's like when they commandeered this weapon, and then we look at it with Unit 1, and it's a rifle. Like it's very obviously a rifle that looks like it was built for Unit 1. I'm like, why did you make it? Why is it a rifle? Like, who was going to operate this in the first place? So even though it's like they are commandeering it, it very much felt like something that was designed for an
and I
Ava
think
to
that's
use.
the very real implication is that it wasn't quote unquote ready and thus made known to everyone else in Nerve. But I do think that it was being developed by someone higher ups for that
There
purpose.
was a plan.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why it was like, oh, wow, weird. This is real. Like, it's exactly what we need in this moment. And it perfectly integrates. We barely had to do anything. Like, I think it's a measure of convenience. Now, I know they said they had to modify something, and that was part of the 12-hour countdown. Somebody like said, like, I'm trying to remember the exact line. Basically, they're like, on our pride, it will be done within 6 hours or something like that. I feel like there was some line like that, but I definitely get the implication that the technology was being developed for them, and it just wasn't in like on the record sort of thing yet where people really knew about it. And so it's just like, oh, look, weird, exactly what we need. Well, don't think about the why, just use it. So yeah, it's an interesting episode. I think it does a great job world building and delving into more characters in that respect. So I'm very, very pleased with this. Like I said, it's my like 4th time through the series at this point, and I'm still like watching most of these episodes just like, yes, that's so well done, or like just appreciating like little nuance of things like that. Even Rei with her weird double speak she does sometimes where it's just unclear. Like as you read into parts of that, like sometimes some of the stuff I've paraphrased here, I've read more into it because what she gave was a very bare bones answer, but with like the perspective of broader scope and having watched it a couple of times, I'm like, really what that's getting into is saying this and this. And it can kind of maybe shine some additional lighter context there. But I'm still being careful and dancing away from getting into too many specific answers on anything. But yeah, this is 3 and 4 weren't bad. Interesting 3. 4 was just kind of like, you gotta just kind of get through it. But 5 and 6 both I thought were very good.
Yeah.
I thought it did a great job balancing character with world building and like exciting action and tension. Like the end of 5, especially when he like immediately comes up the elevator and gets blasted in the chest. I was like, oh damn. I was like, what are you gonna do now? Yeah, I was immediately like, all right, next episode, play. Yep. Don't have time. Oh, too bad. Play.
Yeah, 5 and 6 really made up for the slowness of 4.
Yeah, and then that's why like when I texted you about it earlier and asked, and you're like, some of it was a slog to get through. I was like, that's okay because you followed with 5 and 6. Like I immediately knew what episode you were talking about. I was like, yeah, it's all right. You had it made up for. So yeah, it'll be interesting. This so let's see. I don't remember off the top of my head like 7 and 8 like what we have coming down the pike. I haven't watched them yet either. For this latest walkthrough, so I'm trying to remember like specifically what all is happening in it, but things will definitely pick up here in the coming episodes. You're going to get more perspective on the angels and as well a little bit of the pilots involved, and you're going to see a little bit more of kind of the background of Nerve itself, like how this whole headquarters thing runs, how they kind of operate, why there are questions and things like that around it. Like, gets interesting, definitely for sure. And I think they're going to go into the second impact a little bit too, as well, like in the coming episodes. So a lot to look forward to as we continue down this path, but this was fun. I really enjoyed getting to talk about these episodes, and I'm looking forward to next week's already.
Yeah, it was definitely good. I liked them. So we'll see what's up ahead.
Yeah. All right. Well, tune in next week. I guess we'll try and get into the rotation of rolling these out weekly. But be on the lookout for the next episode. That'll be episode 7 and 8 that we talk about, but it'll be episode 4 of the podcast because we couple them together. But until next time, guys, I don't have a tagline, so just peace.
Thanks, everybody.